The golden halls of Thebes shimmered under the glow of torches, their towering columns engraved with the victories of Pharaoh Akenaten. His reign was absolute, his word divine. And now he had chosen his queen, Lady Nefara, a woman of noble blood, unmatched beauty, and fierce intelligence. She was meant to stand beside him, to rule Egypt as his wife. But there was one problem. She did not love him. She had loved another long before Pharaoh had set his eyes upon her. A man with no title, no riches, only skillful hands, and a heart that belonged to her alone. His name was Malik, a sculptor, a simple artist whose chisels carved gods from stone, yet his hands had only ever worshipped her. For years their love had been a secret, stolen glances in crowded temples, midnight meetings under the stars, silent promises whispered between shadows. But Pharaoh Akenaten did not tolerate defiance, and when he announced their betrothal before the court, he expected only obedience. Instead, Nefara knelt before him, not in reverence, but in refusal. "My Pharaoh," she said, her voice steady but laced with sorrow, "I cannot be your queen." Gasps filled the chamber. No one defied the living God. Pharaoh's golden eyes darkened. "You would dishonor me." "I would not dishonor you, my Pharaoh," Nefara whispered. "But I would dishonor my heart if I wed a man I do not love." The silence that followed was heavier than stone. The Queen Mother's face twisted in rage. The priests lowered their heads, afraid to speak. The guards stood still, awaiting Pharaoh's command. Akenaten did not move, but his wrath was sealed. "Who is he?" His voice was barely a whisper. "The man who has stolen what is mine." Nefara did not answer. She did not have to, because at that moment the doors to the great hall creaked open, and Malik stepped inside. His face was uncovered, his fate already decided. A servant had betrayed them. The secret that had once been their greatest treasure was now their greatest curse. Pharaoh rose from his throne. "Take him," he commanded. And as the guards moved forward, Malik did not fight. He only looked at Nefara. And in that one look, she saw everything. Love, regret, a final goodbye. "No." Nefara's scream shattered the silence, but it was too late. The sculptor who had once carved gods was dragged from the hall like a criminal, and the queen who had once dreamed of love had just signed her own death sentence. The dungeons beneath the palace were silent and cold. Malik sat in the darkness, his hands bound, his fate already sealed. He had not spoken since the guards threw him into the cell, yet his thoughts screamed louder than any voice could. He had been prepared to live a life in hiding with Nefara, but now he would not even get the chance to say one final goodbye. Above, the palace was in turmoil. Nefara had been locked in her chambers, guarded by men who once bowed to her. She paced, her silk robes torn from restless hands, her mind racing for a way out. She had made a mistake, not in loving Malik, but in believing love alone could defy a pharaoh. And now, Akenaten would make her pay. That evening, the court gathered in the great hall. Nobles, priests, generals, they had all come to witness the judgment of a queen who had rejected her king. When Nefara was brought forward, she held her head high. Pharaoh Akenaten sat on his golden throne, his fingers tapping the armrest in slow, deliberate movements. His expression was unreadable, but his fury was absolute. "You defied me before my court," he said, his voice as smooth as a blade. "You chose a man unworthy of you, and now you will face the consequences." The Queen Mother watched from the side, her lips curled into something between satisfaction and pity. But Nefara did not care about their judgment. There was only one person she needed to see. "Where is Malik?" she demanded, her voice unwavering. Pharaoh's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Ah, your sculptor." He flicked his wrist. bring him. The doors swung open, and Malik was dragged into the hall. His tunic was torn, his wrists bruised from iron shackles, but his eyes still burned with love for her. Nefara tried to run to him, but the guards held her back. "Let him go," she cried. "This is between you and me." Pharaoh stood from his throne, descending the steps until he stood between them. "You think love gives you power, Nefara?" His voice was soft, dangerous. "Love makes you weak." Nefara shook her head. "Love makes us stronger than you will ever be." Pharaoh tilted his head, considering her words. Then he smirked. "Then let us test that strength." He turned to Malik. "If you wish to prove your love for Nefara, Sculptor, then you may do so." He gestured toward a heavy bronze sword placed before him. "Kill her!" Gasps filled the court. Nefara's heart stopped. Malik's fists clenched, his breath shallow. "You think I would raise a hand against the woman I love?" he spat. Pharaoh leaned in, whispering just loud enough for all to hear. "If you don't, I will make her suffer in ways you cannot imagine." A deadly silence fell over the hall. Malik looked at Nefara, his hands trembling. And for the first time, fear flickered in her eyes. The great hall was silent, yet the weight of 1,000 whispers filled the air. All eyes were on Malik. Before him lay the sword, a test, a punishment, a cruel game of the Pharaoh's making. If he refused to kill Nefara, she would suffer. If he did, he would be a man who destroyed the only person he had ever loved. Pharaoh Akenaten's voice slithered through the silence. "Well, Sculptor, will you prove your devotion?" Malik's fingers trembled as he reached for the sword. The cold metal bit into his palm, but his heart burned hotter. He looked at Nefara, her dark eyes pleading, not with fear, but with certainty. "Don't do this, Malik." He turned back to Akenaten, his grip tightening. "If love is a test, my Pharaoh, then let me show you how a man passes it." In one swift motion, Malik spun the blade, not toward Nefara, but toward himself. Gasps erupted through the court as he pressed the blade to his own throat. "If she dies, I die with her." His voice rang like thunder. "You may command armies, Pharaoh, but you do not command my soul." A flicker of surprise crossed Akenaten's face. For a moment, no one moved. Then, with a slow, calculated smirk, the Pharaoh gestured to the guards. "Take him away." Malik was ripped from Nefara's sight before she could scream, before she could reach for him. "No!" she cried, struggling against the hands that held her. Akenaten watched her break and then turned, his golden robes trailing behind him. "He has made his choice, Nefara. Now it is your turn." As the doors closed behind Malik, Nefara knew this was not over. It was just the beginning of her suffering. The days blurred into nights. Nefara had been locked away in a tower chamber, far from the court, far from Malik. No visitors, no escape, only the slow decay of hope. Then, one evening, the Queen Mother appeared, draped in gold, her face carved from stone. "Pharaoh has decided your fate," she said, her voice a blade wrapped in silk. Nefara refused to kneel. "Then let him tell me himself." The Queen Mother smirked. "He does not need to. Tomorrow, you will die at dawn." The words settled like poison. Nefara should have been afraid. But she only had one question. "And Malik?" The Queen Mother tilted her head, as if amused. "Still breathing, but not for long." The door slammed shut, leaving Nefara alone. The sun was setting over Thebes, painting the sky in deep shades of crimson, a beautiful color, the last she would ever see. She closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer, not for herself, but for him. Because when the sun rose again, the Queen of Egypt would take her final breath. The first light of dawn crept over Thebes, golden rays stretching across the palace walls. But inside the execution chamber, there was no warmth. Nefara stood tall, her hands bound in golden chains. Ironic, she thought. Even in death, they dressed her like a queen. The court had gathered, hungry for spectacle. The Queen Mother watched with cold satisfaction, while Pharaoh Akenaten sat motionless on his throne. "Do you regret it now?" His voice was smooth, almost gentle. "You could have had everything." Nefara lifted her chin, defiant until the end. "I had everything," she whispered, "and you took it from me." Akhenaten's eyes darkened. With a flick of his hand, the executioner stepped forward. A blade gleamed in the morning sun. Nefara closed her eyes. And then, a scream tore through the chamber. "Stop!" The doors burst open. Malik, bloodied, bruised, but alive. The guards had beaten him, imprisoned him, but they had not broken him. "Let her go!" he roared, staggering toward her, though his body barely held itself up. A murmur rippled through the court. A slave, standing before a god, challenging a pharaoh. Akhenaten smiled. "Very well," he said. "If you want her so desperately, then die with her." He gave the signal. The executioner raised his sword. Nefara and Malik locked eyes. No words were needed. This was their fate. And as the blade came down, they fell into each other's arms. Two lovers. One final embrace. Blood stained the palace floor. The Queen Mother turned away. The court was silent. Akhenaten only watched. And outside, the sun rose over Thebes as if nothing had changed. But history would remember. The queen who defied a pharaoh. The sculptor who loved a queen. And the love that conquered even death. The end